During a family gathering, my sister stood up and declared, "Dad and Mom decided I should move into your house." I took a sip of my drink and said, "That's funny, because I sold it last week." Her jaw dropped when I handed her the new owner's business card and watched her face turn pale. Hi, guys. Sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you. It was one of those sticky summer afternoons where the air feels heavy with heat and nostalgia, where everything smells like grilled corn, cheap beer, and sunscreen, and people pretend like things are just fine because they've decided it's easier that way. My family was gathered in the backyard exactly like we'd done for decades, folding chairs sinking into grass, paper plates balanced on laps, kids running in circles, and everyone trying a little too hard to laugh a little too loud. But beneath all that clatter and forced chair, I could already feel something simmering under the surface, something off, something rotten wrapped in a smile. And it didn't take long for it to rise to the top. Erica, my sister, stood up like a woman about to give a damn acceptance speech with that cocky little half smirk she always wore when she thought she was about to impress someone, or more accurately, when she thought she was about to take something that wasn't hers and get applauded for it. She raised her beer bottle halfway in the air, the way people do when they're about to make a toast, but her words weren't celebratory. They were surgical, calculated, and disgustingly rehearsed. "Dad and Mom decided I should move into your house," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear it, like it was some harmless announcement instead of a blindside. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at her, not blinking, not flinching, not giving her the satisfaction of watching me panic or stammer or question what the hell she just said. Instead, I picked up my glass white wine, slightly watered down from the ice melting faster than I could drink it, and took a slow sip. Not because I needed the alcohol, but because I wanted to savor the moment. The moment before the storm. The moment right before her world tilted. "That's funny," I said, calm as a breeze on a quiet lake, "because I sold it last week." The smirk melted off her face so fast it was almost beautiful. She looked at me like I'd just slapped her in the mouth in front of a priest, eyes darting around, searching for someone to confirm that I was joking, that I didn't mean it, that I was bluffing. But I wasn't. I reached into my bag, pulled out a small cream-colored card, and slid it across the picnic table like a poker chip tossed by a man holding 4 aces. "Here," I said, nodding toward it. "You can give this to your moving truck. That's the new owner's contact information." The silence that followed was brutal. Everyone froze. The laughter died. The silverware paused. The breeze even seemed to hold its breath. Daniel, our father, looked like he'd just swallowed his own tongue. My mother looked down at her plate, suddenly fascinated by a piece of overcooked chicken. Erica's hand hovered over the card like she was afraid it might bite her, but eventually, she picked it up and read the name. Her jaw clenched, her face turned a shade paler, and for the first time in years, she didn't have a comeback. "And now I want to ask you something." "Yes." "You sitting there listening to this story. Has your family ever made a decision for you without asking, like your life is a spare bedroom they can assign to whoever's next in line? Have you ever been treated like an accessory, like your boundaries don't matter because someone else needs something more? Have they ever smiled in your face while planning around your back? If you've lived that, even once, I want you to tell me in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one. But let me take you back, just a little, to the weeks before this barbecue, before this bizarre declaration, before this smoldering little fire turned into an inferno. There were signs, of course, there always are. The subtle shift in tone when my father called me asking questions about the house like he was just curious. Was I happy there? Did I ever feel lonely? Did I think I'd ever move out and upgrade someday? Innocent on the surface, but layered with implication. Then came the comments from Mom, casual and quiet, suggesting that maybe I'd want to be closer to family soon, or that the house felt a little big for one person anyway. At first, I didn't think much of it. I'd heard these kinds of manipulative nudges before, usually followed by a guilt trip about missing a holiday or forgetting someone's birthday. But then I caught wind of something odd. A friend of mine mentioned that Erica had been bragging at a bar about getting a new place soon and how she'd be living rent-free thanks to our parents. It sounded too absurd to be real, but the more I thought about it, the more everything started clicking into place. And now, watching Erica sit back down in stunned silence, watching Daniel's lips tighten as he tried to form some excuse, watching the rest of the table slowly shift back into fake conversation like nothing had happened, I realized I'd only scratched the surface of something bigger. Because if they had the nerve to try and hand over my home like it was some hand-me-down sweater, then what else had they planned behind those closed doors, behind those forced smiles? Erica stormed off after a few minutes, muttering curses under her breath, tossing the card onto the grass like it was poison. Daniel didn't speak to me for the rest of the evening, just stared into his glass like he could rewrite the last 10 minutes if he stared hard enough. But I knew the game had just begun, and I intended to play it better than they ever expected. There are some truths you don't really speak out loud, not because they're secrets, but because they've been baked so deep into the walls of your childhood home that you start mistaking them for normal. Like how Erica always got the last piece of cake, even if she didn't want it, just because she was the baby of the family and she's growing. Let her have it. Or how she got the better bedroom the day we moved into that 2-story house, the one with the bigger windows and the built-in shelves, while I was handed the one that smelled faintly of mildew and had the creaky floorboard right beside the bed. It was the same way with everything. She got the car, the allowance, the weekend passes to go out with friends while I was stuck picking up shifts at the grocery store to afford school supplies and cheap second-hand clothes. When college came around, she was handed a fully funded education with a dorm room and a debit card that never hit zero while I was working 2 part-time jobs just to scrape through community college, printing my essays on library computers and living off instant noodles because no one thought I needed help. And every time I brought it up, every time I so much as raised an eyebrow about the difference in how we were treated, I'd get the same line from Daniel, served with that sickly sweet tone he used to cover his tracks. "You're the strong one. You don't need help like she does. You've always been so independent, son." What he really meant was that he expected me to bend, to absorb all the imbalance, to swallow resentment like vitamins and smile through it because that's what family does. Daniel believed that sons were meant to sacrifice, to stretch themselves thin while their sisters floated comfortably through life on cushions built from someone else's spine. He wore that belief like cologne, subtle, suffocating, and hard to wash off. When I bought my house, it was the first real thing that was entirely mine. No help from my parents, no cosigner, no borrowed money, just my own grit, long hours, sleepless nights, and a savings account that grew slowly but steadily over years of not buying new clothes, skipping vacations, and packing my own damn lunch every day. That house wasn't just property. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't dependent on anyone, that I didn't need Daniel's validation or Erica's smug nods or Francis's silent approval. That house was where I could finally exhale. So when the guilt started rolling in, when the tone of the phone calls shifted from casual to calculated, I felt it like a draft in a sealed room. It started small, Daniel mentioning that Erica had been going through a rough patch, that she just needed a little stability, that maybe it would be nice for her to have a place to get back on her feet. I tried to be patient, tried to understand, but every sentence was laced with that unspoken expectation that I should just hand over the keys and make myself small again. When I hesitated, the pressure started to build like water behind a dam. Suddenly, Daniel was calling more often, asking about the house, asking about my plans, suggesting maybe I wasn't as attached as I thought, planting doubts like weeds in my mind. When I didn't give him the answer he wanted, he pulled out his old weapons, emotional blackmail, guilt trips, and icy silence. "I just thought you'd care more about your family," he said once after I told him I wasn't comfortable with the idea. "I guess we were wrong about you. It's funny how quickly love turns into manipulation when people don't get what they want. It's funny how they twist your strength into selfishness, how they call your boundaries betrayal." And then one afternoon, when I was cleaning out the old desk in my study, I found it, a yellowing envelope tucked between unpaid utility statements and random papers from years ago. It wasn't mine. It was Daniel's handwriting, unmistakable in its elegant loops and sharp edges. Inside was a draft document, nothing official, but enough to chill my blood. A fake transfer of ownership agreement listing my house, my address, my full name with blank lines left for a signature I had never given. He was preparing to hand it over behind my back. And just like that, I realized this wasn't just about a house anymore. This was war. I didn't waste time pretending to be confused anymore, not after finding that damn envelope with the draft of a transfer of ownership I'd never agreed to written in Daniel's careful, calculating cursive. Like, he thought he could just write me out of my own life with the same hand he used to sign birthday cards. I sat with it for a full day, staring at those blank signature lines like they were a loaded gun left on my kitchen table. There was no doubt in my mind anymore. This wasn't some innocent misunderstanding. It wasn't a moment of miscommunication or a well-meaning suggestion gone sideways. This was planned, plotted, and executed quietly behind my back with the kind of smug confidence that only comes from years of never being told no. So the next morning, I drove straight to their house. No call ahead. No polite heads up. No chance for them to rehearse whatever half-assed excuses they were already working on. I knocked once, then let myself in because at that point, I wasn't playing nice anymore. I found them in the kitchen, mid-conversation, sipping their coffee like everything was fine, like they hadn't just tried to steal the only thing I'd worked for with my own damn hands. I dropped the envelope right on the table between them and said, "How long have you been planning this?" Daniel looked up first, calm as a winter pond, and not the least bit surprised. Francis flinched as if just the presence of conflict was too heavy for her to carry, already retreating into the safe silence she'd always used as a shield. But Daniel didn't flinch, didn't stammer, didn't even pretend to be confused. Instead, he tilted his head slightly and said, "She's your sister. She needs this. You'll understand when you're older." Older? I nearly laughed in his face right then. I was 40, not 14, and I understood just fine. What he meant was, you're supposed to give up what you earned because we decided she deserves it more. He didn't deny it, didn't even try to soften the blow, just laid it out flat, like my house was some family heirloom he could reassign to the child who needed it most, like my independence was a temporary placeholder for Erica's comfort. "She's going through a hard time," he added, as if that somehow justified the betrayal, as if temporary inconvenience in Erica's life meant permanent sacrifice in mine. I asked him, point blank, if Erica had been inside my house while I was out of town for work last month. He didn't answer directly, but he didn't have to. His eyes flickered just long enough, and Frances looked down at her coffee like it might save her from having to speak. That was all the confirmation I needed. But it was my friend Jamie who filled in the rest of the puzzle later that afternoon, calling me in disbelief after running into Erica at a local cafe. She said she was moving in soon, he told me, his voice thick with disbelief, like it was already done. She said you were downsizing or relocating or something, that your parents were helping transition everything. Transition. That word rattled in my head for hours. They weren't just taking the house. They were rewriting the story, reshaping the narrative so I wouldn't even get the dignity of truth. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a rewrite, a power grab dressed up as a family favor. And maybe that's what hurt the most, not just the theft of property, but the arrogance, the sheer entitlement, the absolute certainty that I'd just roll over and let it happen. That I'd smile and nod and step aside for my golden girl sister because that's what family does. But this time, I wasn't stepping aside. This time, I wasn't the one compromising. I remembered a moment from years ago, one of those quiet conversations that stays lodged in your memory even when you try to forget it. I was 17, helping Daniel in the kitchen after dinner, and I'd asked why Erica never got the same chores or responsibilities. He'd smiled and said, "You'll always have to work harder, that's just the way it is." At the time, I thought he meant life in general. Now I realized he'd meant within this family. Later that evening, I went home, still simmering, and decided to double-check every corner of my house. Something in me just couldn't settle, couldn't rest. And when I walked into my bedroom, I knew I wasn't imagining it. My nightstand drawer was open. Not wide, just enough to be noticeable if you were paying attention. Other drawers too, slightly off-center, like someone had been there, poking around, thinking I wouldn't notice. And then I checked my key tray by the door, the spare set I kept for emergencies. Gone. That's when I knew this wasn't over. This wasn't just a plan. It was already in motion. The first time I met Ms. Conway, I knew instantly that she wasn't just another buyer looking for property on a whim, but someone who could read silence better than most people read spoken words. She stood on my porch with the kind of calm that didn't come from arrogance or rush, but from someone who'd lived long enough to know that real power never needs to announce itself. Her handshake was firm but unassuming, her gaze steady but never invasive, and the way she looked around the house made it clear she understood this wasn't just a financial transaction. It was something deeper, something personal. And I think that's why I trusted her without needing to know too much. She didn't bombard me with offers or try to sweet-talk her way into a deal like some of the others had before her. She simply walked through each room like a woman who respected walls that had held secrets and windows that had seen things most people wouldn't talk about at the dinner table. And after the second walk-through, she turned to me, hands in her pockets, and asked me the simplest yet most disarming question I'd heard in weeks. "Are you sure you're ready to let go?" She didn't mean just the keys or the bricks and drywall. She meant everything attached to it. The years I spent building that space, the memories etched into the door frames, the battles fought behind closed doors, and the bloodline expectations that came crawling up my walls every time Daniel called or Erica smirked like she owned the place. And without hesitation, I said yes. Not because it was easy, not because it didn't sting somewhere deep in the hollow parts of me, but because I knew that holding on to that house would mean holding on to a version of myself I didn't want to be anymore, obedient, accommodating, forever bending so someone else could stretch. The paperwork went through fast. Clean sale. No hiccups. The title transfer was seamless, the legal details tucked away in manila folders handled by professionals who didn't ask questions and didn't care about family drama disguised as property arrangements. The keys were handed over by the end of the week. And just like that, the house that had once been a symbol of freedom and then a target of betrayal became something else entirely, a door I closed without ever looking back. I didn't tell anyone about the sale, not my coworkers, not my friends, not even Jamie, who usually heard everything first and figured out the rest. I didn't tell because I didn't want it to become gossip or a pity story or even a celebration. I wanted it to be quiet. I wanted the silence to carry the weight of the move. I wanted it to hit like cold water when the time came, and I wanted it to leave an aftertaste that wouldn't wash out easily. Some revenge isn't about yelling or slamming doors. It's about timing, precision, and the clean satisfaction of knowing you made a decision without begging anyone's approval. I thought a lot about something Daniel used to say when we were kids, and he'd try to guilt me into doing things for Erica even when I was exhausted or overwhelmed or just wanted a damn minute to breathe. Family before everything, he'd whisper, like it was some sacred law carved in stone instead of a leash wrapped around my neck. And when I handed over the last set of keys to Ms. Conway, I muttered under my breath, barely loud enough to hear myself, "Not anymore." I thought that would be the end of it, just a clean transaction with no lingering threads, but Ms. Conway surprised me at the final meeting. She slid a small, sealed envelope across the table, her expression unreadable but not unkind. "You'll understand soon enough," she said softly. Consider it a parting gift or maybe just something you'll need later. I held it in my hand for a few seconds, tempted to tear it open right there in front of her, but something about her tone made me pause. I slipped it into my bag without another word, told her thank you, and left the building without looking back. I had no idea what was inside, but something told me it was going to matter more than I could possibly imagine. I waited 3 full days before opening the envelope, not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because something in me knew it wasn't just another line of paperwork or a thank you note from a businesswoman tying up loose ends. There was a weight to it, a kind of stillness that clung to the sealed flap, and every time I reached for it, I paused, sensing that it was something meant to be opened in the right moment, not rushed, not mindlessly unfolded between errands, but absorbed slowly and fully, like a sip of something strong that needs time to settle. When I finally sat down to read it, the house was already gone. My mind was clear, and I felt ready, not just to know what Ms. Conway had left me, but to understand it. The letter was handwritten, old school, neat, and thoughtful, the kind of penmanship that tells you a person doesn't do anything halfway. She opened with something simple. I don't usually say much to the people I do business with. I let numbers do the talking, but I think you deserve to know why I bought your house. She went on to tell me about her brother. His name was Rory, and how he'd spent most of his life trying to carve out space for himself in a family that treated him like a second-class citizen while his sister, the youngest and the loudest, was handed everything without asking. Rory had owned his own home once too, worked for it, paid every cent, and loved it fiercely. And one day, his family tried to take it from him under the same disguise mine wore. It's just temporary. She needs help. You're strong. You can handle it. He gave in back then, Ms. Conway wrote, and it broke something in him he never quite got back. That house became hers when he died. She sold it out of necessity but never forgave herself for not protecting him better. So when she heard my story briefly, indirectly, through a friend who passed along my listing and mentioned I seemed eager to move without saying why, she felt something twist in her gut. She said she wasn't just buying property that day. She was balancing a scale that had been off for far too long. At the end of the letter, she made an offer that I read 3 times just to make sure I hadn't misunderstood it. She wanted me to come work for her, managing a new real estate project she was starting on the edge of town, something meaningful, something with room to grow. Not just a job, but a chance to build something entirely my own again. A chance to use everything I'd learned, not just professionally, but personally, because some lessons are born out of bloodlines and betrayal, and they shape you more than any degree ever could. While all of this was unfolding quietly in the background, Erica continued walking around town like a woman about to inherit a kingdom. I heard through mutual acquaintances and mutual irritants that she was telling everyone she'd be moving in within a couple weeks, making little jokes about how she'd finally have a space that suits her, bragging about how our parents just knew it was the right choice. She even posted a photo of my old front porch on social media with some bullshit caption about new beginnings as if she hadn't earned that house with anything more than a smirk and a name. Daniel, meanwhile, started testing the waters in the other direction. I could tell he was beginning to feel the ground shift beneath his heels, sensing that something was off, but not yet able to admit it. He called a few times, softening his tone, saying things like, maybe we pushed too hard, or we should have included you in the conversation more. He didn't apologize. Of course, Daniel never apologized, but he dropped his words like breadcrumbs, hoping I'd follow them back into the trap he built with his own damn hands. I didn't take the bait. I let him talk. I let him squirm. I nodded when needed and offered just enough silence to keep him guessing. There's a special kind of revenge in making people sit with their own discomfort, in letting them flounder in uncertainty instead of giving them clarity. And then came the message that sealed it all. The next family gathering was scheduled. Another backyard get-together, another table full of forced smiles, another opportunity for someone to try to rewrite the script in their favor. Only this time, I wasn't showing up as the obedient son or the discarded brother. This time, I was arriving with a plan, with perfect timing, and with a quiet storm tucked beneath my sleeve. Because what Erica didn't know, what Daniel hadn't even begun to suspect, was that the show was already over. I was just letting them believe the curtains hadn't dropped yet. It was one of those early fall afternoons that still pretended to be summer, with the air warm enough to make you sweat, but the breeze carrying just a hint of change. The kind that brushes across your skin and tells you something's about to shift whether you're ready for it or not. The backyard was set up just like always, folding tables covered in plastic cloths with floral patterns, coolers full of beer and soda, kids running barefoot through the grass, and the smell of charred meat wafting from the grill as Frances hovered over it like it was the only thing she still had control over. Everyone was pretending, again, that this was just another family gathering, another picture-perfect day of unity and tradition. But underneath it all, the tension hummed so thick you could almost slice it with a butter knife. Daniel floated around in his usual host mode, pouring wine with one hand and complimenting people through clenched teeth, clearly trying to maintain his grip on the fantasy he'd built, a fantasy where he still held all the strings and everyone danced the way he wanted. Frances mostly stayed quiet as she always did, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might try to drag her into an actual conversation. And Erica? Erica was practically glowing with that same smug confidence she'd worn since childhood, walking around like a woman who knew something the rest of us didn't. Like, she was just biding her time before making some grand declaration that would once again center her in the spotlight where she believed she naturally belonged. I knew it was coming. I'd known from the moment Daniel had called a week before and said, in that careful, syrupy tone, "We'd really love it if you joined us this time. It wouldn't be the same without you." I knew what they were planning. I knew what they expected. And more than anything, I knew exactly how I was going to respond when the moment came. So I dressed like it was any other Sunday. Nothing too showy, nothing that screamed defiance. Just simple elegance. Something soft and effortless. The kind of look that made people underestimate you while you quietly plan their downfall. I brought a bottle of wine, made polite small talk, and kept my hands loose and my voice warm because I wanted them all to feel safe right up until the moment I pulled the rug out from under their feet. And then it happened just as I knew it would. Erica stood up, beer in one hand, fork in the other, acting like she was delivering a toast at her own damn coronation. She smiled that infuriating smile of hers, the one that always meant she was about to say something entirely self-serving while pretending it was for the good of the family. "Well," she said, raising her voice just enough to quiet the nearby chatter, "Dad and Mom said I should move into your house. It's better for the family, you know? Makes sense, really." I didn't blink. I didn't gasp. I didn't even look at Daniel, whose eyes were locked on mine, waiting for my reaction like a director watching his scene unfold. Instead, I reached for my wine glass, took a long, slow sip, and then set it down with the calmness of someone who's already lived this moment 1,000 times in his mind. "That's funny," I said, my voice steady and just loud enough for everyone to hear because I sold it last week. You could have heard a pin drop on the grass. Erica froze, blinking like she didn't understand the words I'd just said, as if I'd spoken in a language she'd never heard before. Daniel's fork slipped from his hand and clattered against his plate, sharp and awkward in the silence. Frances's eyes went wide, and for the first time in years, she looked like she might actually speak, but nothing came out except a breathy little wheeze that made her reach for her drink instead. I didn't wait for Erica to ask anything. I calmly reached into my bag, pulled out a small cream-colored card, and slid it across the table toward her slow and deliberate, like a dealer laying down the final card in a game she didn't even know she was losing. She picked it up with trembling fingers, read the name Ms. Conway, and I watched the color drain from her face in real time. I didn't need to explain who that was. I didn't need to say another word. Her expression told me everything I needed to know, that she knew she'd been blindsided, that she understood she wasn't walking into a house. She was walking straight into her own failure. "The new owner should be in touch soon," I said, lifting my glass again. "Maybe she'll let you mow the lawn." And just like that, I stood up, smoothed my shirt, and walked away, not in anger, not in triumph, but in peace, the kind of peace that only comes when you've chosen yourself over the people who kept trying to rewrite your life like you were just a footnote in their story. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. 3 months later, I was sitting in Ms. Conway's office, reviewing plans for a new development project when my phone buzzed with a message from Jamie. "You're not going to believe this," it read, followed by a screenshot from Erica's social media. It was a photo of her, surrounded by boxes in some dingy apartment, with a caption about starting over and family betrayal that made my stomach churn not with guilt, but with a strange mix of pity and disgust. I set the phone down and looked out the window at the skyline, thinking about how differently things had unfolded than anyone expected. Daniel had called exactly 17 times after that day in the backyard. The first few calls were angry, explosive even, demanding explanations and throwing accusations about loyalty and family. Then came the guilt trips, the soft reminders of childhood memories meant to tug at heartstrings I'd finally cut loose. The final calls were desperate, tearful pleas for reconciliation, not because he understood what he'd done wrong, but because the family dynamic had collapsed in my absence. Frances had reached out only once, an awkward voicemail that started with "I should have said something" and ended with "I don't know how things got this bad." It was the closest thing to honesty I'd ever heard from her, but it came too late to matter. The extended family had picked sides, as families always do. Some understood my position immediately, having witnessed years of the imbalance firsthand. Others sided with Daniel and Erica, believing whatever twisted narrative they'd crafted to explain away their behavior. Ms. Conway, Elizabeth, as she insisted I call her now, had become something of a mentor. The job offer wasn't charity or sympathy, it was recognition of potential she said she'd seen the moment we met. Under her guidance, I was learning the real estate business from the ground up, not just the transactions and paperwork, but the psychology of space, the emotional weight of property, the way people attach their identities to walls and windows. "Your brother still hasn't found you?" she asked one afternoon over lunch, noticing me checking a blocked call notification. "No," I replied. "And he won't. I moved 3 times in 2 months to make sure of it." She nodded, understanding the need for clean breaks. "And the house?" "Sold again," I said. "To a young couple with twins. They're painting the walls yellow and building a treehouse in the backyard." There was something deeply satisfying about knowing my old home now belonged to people who would fill it with the kind of love I'd never felt in my own family. Something right about the fact that Erica would drive by occasionally, according to neighborhood gossip, slowing down to stare at a place she'd never set foot in. The most surprising turn came 6 weeks after the backyard incident. A package arrived at my office, delivered by courier, containing a set of legal documents. My grandmother's will, my father's mother, had been found during a clean-out of an old filing cabinet. A will that had been deliberately hidden for years, one that left a substantial inheritance directly to me, bypassing Daniel entirely. Property in another state, investments that had quietly grown, and a letter explaining that she'd always seen the disparity in how I was treated and had wanted to balance the scales. Daniel had known. All those years of making me feel like I had to earn every scrap while Erica was handed the world, he'd known there was a fortune with my name on it. A fortune he'd tried to keep from me by burying the will where he thought no one would look. It was the final confirmation that walking away had been the only sane choice. Not just from the house, but from the entire toxic ecosystem that had been draining me dry for 40 years. Last week, I bought my own place again. Not out of necessity or desperation to prove something, but because I wanted to. A modern condo overlooking the river, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a balcony where I can have my morning coffee in peace. No family pictures on the walls. No heirlooms carrying the weight of obligation. Just clean, open space filled with things I chose myself. Sometimes I think about that last family gathering, about the moment when Erica's face fell as she realized the house wasn't hers for the taking. I wonder if she's learned anything from it. I wonder if Daniel ever realizes what he lost was worth far more than a piece of property. I wonder if Frances ever found her voice. But mostly, I don't wonder at all. I just live, freely, in a space that's truly mine in every sense of the word. And when Elizabeth asks if I ever regret cutting ties so completely, I just smile and tell her the truth. Some family trees need pruning if you ever want to grow.